today with Cleo Qian, and we are talking about her story, Monitor World, first published in Shenandoah Literary Magazine in the fall of 2021. Let's Deconstruct a Story is a reader-supported publication, and we would love it if you would consider becoming a paid subscriber. We need all the support we can get. Thank you. Welcome, Cleo. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I don't know if you knew that we studied the story a little bit on Let's Deconstruct a Story.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I do this Substack. And so I just started the Substack. So I kept like the little classes kind of small because I just was starting out. So we did a first pass and then we did a second pass on the story. So it was really fun. So they came up with some of the questions too. Okay, so I always start with the same question, which is if you could tell me a little bit about the genesis of the story.
Yeah, I initially drafted this story late in 2020 after some of the intense lockdown restrictions were lifted. And I guess I think of the story as having sort of three themes. A lot of it's about being in virtual spaces. Many of us, the lucky ones, had spent the lockdowns doing remote jobs. And that really intensified this feeling that had been kind of like growing in my life and in the lives, I think, of others around me, that the online world was more real than the physical world. And then the second part that I think is important to the story is how N feels like she's in a really stuck period of life, like her life's not moving forward. And she's just, very powerless and kind of like in this no man's land in where she is at in life right now. And then the final part is, of course, like the sense of threat and danger that she has as a young woman.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because she's a little bit older than my kids were at that time. So they were like early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was an okay time to be, if you were safe, obviously, to be in your mid 40s, because you weren't like, we were just watching TV and, we were past the time of going out and meeting people and having big social lives and that kind of thing. And also, our lives were already started. We weren't just, setting out basically and then getting stymied. So I thought it was a really particularly hard time obviously for kids, right? But I mean, for people in their 20s who are just, I don't know, venturing out into the world, it must have been a really tough time.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think of it in that way in comparison, I guess, to someone who has already felt like their life got set up properly.
Well, one of my kids, my youngest kids, mentioned that, he was online almost the entire time, right? Playing games and visiting with people and talking to people. And then it didn't really occur to him, oh, wait, I don't know that I have a real life, for a long time. I mean, I don't know that I guess it felt more real to him than real life, like you're saying. Is
Yeah.
that kind of what you're saying? Or
Yeah.
when there was a delayed kind of reaction to what was happening?
Yeah. And I also somewhat feel that, like in retrospect, I don't think I, felt this when I was writing the story. Um, it kind of marked the end of some techno optimism because prior to our whole lives shifting remote, there was a lot of feelings that the internet, you could connect to people through the internet. There were more opportunities for diversity and finding niche interests. There wasn't the sense that the internet was all bad. And, remote work was initially seen as kind of like this amazing development too. And, there was still some sense that technology was, there were good things to it, and that there were good things to being on the internet, and that, you could be interesting people through dating apps and through various online mediums, and that you could have interesting conversations online. And I think that post lockdown, that sense of techno optimism has really crumbled. I don't think people really felt like, after having lived through remote work and remote learning and all that, I don't think they felt like it was really a substitute for having an in-person life anymore.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I won't go off I could go on and on about this, but we'll go back to the story. I get what you're saying. Okay, so we're in close third person in the story, and we only have access to her POV. But in the first sentence, you refer to her as she, and then the rest of the story, she's N. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about your decision not to name her.
Yeah. Well, I just like naming characters in general. I think
Okay.
that, yeah. I mean,
I
I
want to
do
hear
it.
about that. I
I
want to
do
hear.
it to like a larger, like to a more like there's a real name attached to a lot of the characters in my other stories, but I always resent it. I try as hard as possible to use initials or not name characters or to use their names very minimally. I think that people have a lot of association and projections with names. It can give them like preconceived notions about a person. And in my mind, not naming someone or not giving them kind of like a very like common human name is a way to give the characters actually some privacy. And particularly in this story, like, the sense of disembodiment is very intense. And so it also intensified the feeling of disembodiment, I thought, by not giving her like a full name.
And also maybe it increases the humanity of the character, not giving, what separates us sometimes are names. You know what I mean? Like in this world in particular, that's so fractured. I thought it's a cool way to say, like, this is like a human being in this story, independent of any naming. So tell me a little bit about the web editing. This is something that I'm not familiar with. And so I thought, okay, what are they actually doing in the hangar?
Yes, this part of the story is actually based on a real job I had, that I also found off Craigslist when I was in college. And I also worked in an airplane hangar in the desert. And I think,
That was such a wild location. Oh my God.
yeah,
It just
at the
sounded awful.
time, at the time, I didn't think it was so weird. But looking back, I was like, wow, what a weird job that was. So I think, I mean, what they're doing is they're basically making junk websites full of junk articles that have a bunch of search engine optimized like keywords in them. And the idea is to kind of like gamify Google's ad revenue by like trying to get as many like random ad hits as possible through these like hyper specific like search engine optimized like SEO keywords. And then this is before AI, so they have to write all the articles or like farm out the writing of the articles themselves. And they're just trying to generate as many like junk articles and junk websites as possible, so that their boss can hopefully get some ad revenue down the line. Like it's very much like a in the future this is going to pay off kind of job that the boss has given them.
And then he will have to, if he gets caught doing this, he's ready to leave at any second and just wrap things up. And it
Well,
seemed
it's
like
not illegal exactly.
that's
The
what
part
I
that
wasn't sure. Yeah.
I think what they're doing with the buying up of domains and filling it with junk website articles, like that's not illegal. But what he is also doing is he's trying to bake his own website traffic.
Oh my
So he's
God.
making and I remember this happening to us. Like he would have us, and in the story, the character does the same. He has them make fake like accounts to comment on the fake on the junk articles and drive like web traffic. And to do that, you have to like scramble your IP address so that you're not caught making too many multiple Facebook accounts or something like that. So that's the part that's a bit more sketchy. And I don't think it's the kind of thing where you have to leave the country if you're caught, but it's not
Right.
like it's not
Right.
like
It's
a
not
super like straightforward business practice.
right. Right. Oh my gosh. Well, and then tell me a little bit about the game that she's playing throughout the story. Is it based on a real game? I'm not a gamer, so what were you? I'm sure everybody who is a gamer is like, oh God, this lady doesn't know.
Well, I'm not a gamer either.
Okay.
Mm, I know a lot of people who are gamers,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like secondhand knowledge that I have. The zombie game is not a real game. I feel like I've seen a lot of games that like could be like it. It's kind of like just like a phone like shooting game in my head, like that you're like just like kind of like killing off zombies in this like 2D pixel art world. But the
Right.
other game, Maple Story, that's a real game. That was a very popular game when I was in middle school and high school. And it's kind of like a fantasy MMORPG, which is massively multi online player role playing
Oh,
game, I think.
oh yeah.
MMORPG.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so you have a little avatar that's like made out of pixels, and then that avatar like journeys through this fantasy world and battles monsters and levels up.
Um, I loved the inclusion of the Lucia Berlin waitress in the story. And I just wanted you to, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about how you envisioned her and what the work of Lucia Berlin in particular means to you.
Yeah, I mean that waitress in my mind, Lucia Berlin, her characters, they're tough. They're women who are, working class. They've like seen struggle. They like are kind of they've seen a lot of life and they're a bit wiser and like, seasoned by
Exactly.
everything they've like gone through in life. And I think in this story, that waitress, she's moving to a very masculine environment, all these like pilots and aviators in the diner, in the middle of nowhere. And she sees this young woman and she feels a bit protective of her because she sees, someone who is more vulnerable and more naive.
There's a real disconnect in the story. Well, I was so terrified for her, for N, because she's playing the game and she meets Agamemnon and it's avatars and none of it is real, but she's sort of feeling that it's real, right? And then she kind of decides to leap out of that virtual world and live in the real world. And so for someone who's an like older woman, I was immediately just like completely freaked out. And she goes over there and I love the way that her experience with him is not expected. It doesn't follow the expected trajectory, although it still remains really sinister. And I wondered how you managed that whole interaction with the two of them, because it easily could have fallen into cliche, is I guess my bottom line. And yet it never did.
I'm curious what you think the expected trajectory would have been.
Well, I thought for sure he was an older guy, so that was expected. I expected that. And then I immediately expected that he was going to assault her or that she
Mhm.
was going to get into a situation she couldn't get out of. I guess her willingness to be in the situation I thought was really cool. Like she was seeing it as her experience, which I guess in stories in the past, maybe in a couple of decades before, there was more agency to this character than
Mhm.
than I've seen in other women characters, which I really loved. She was just in it to enjoy herself. And yet at the same time I was worried because he has more physical power than her, right? So it's sort of a catch-22 because you do have agency and that's awesome, and yet you're still physically vulnerable. So I love the fact that it didn't play out. It sort of, you extended the scene through several scenes with them. And she remained like really smart on the one hand, but then still willing to interact with him on the other hand. So
Mhm.
I don't know what I'm saying, but none of that. I guess in my mind, if it had been an expected situation, it just would have been an assault and she would have had to run. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I oh.
So I'm wondering when you started writing all that, did you see it the way it was in the final story from the beginning, or did you have to play with their interaction?
I played with their interaction a bit. I think, I don't know that she's smart.
I
um,
don't know. Well, not smart. No. I guess the way I would say is that she has agency in that she wants something from him, right?
mhm.
And she gets it. It seems like she enjoys herself at first. In the very first scene
Yeah,
with them together,
true.
she gets physical enjoyment out of it.
I think that she, you know, she downloaded the app because
Right.
she wanted something to happen. Like there was a feeling like her life is so stuck and there's no forward momentum. And, in a way she's bored. Like she's like very bored with her life. And so I think, I would say what she wanted to happen was not necessarily, it's not just like, I don't know, a hookup or something. I think she wanted like some plot to happen in her life. And so she definitely got that. Um, I think by the end of the story, you wonder a little bit like, is having plot happen actually good for you or is it scary? And, like what are the consequences of having plot happen to you? I think that as a young woman, she hasn't experienced so many consequences so far. So this is, in fact, one of the first times in her life, maybe, or in her early life, that she starts to understand what it might mean to like experience consequences or to be in a dangerous situation that she also kind of got herself into. And I think that many young women are like that. Like, I think many young women are very hungry for experience and for agency and kind of put themselves into or are involved in like thrill seeking in a way.
Right. Yeah, it's because she's used to, well, there were several times in the story where things became overwhelming. And in order to deal with the overwhelm, she goes into the game, right? Like she just plays the game until she feels like she's strong in the game and she can win in the game. And I did get the sense that she had never been in a situation before where the other person is actually real and cannot just be turned off or, you can't get up from the monitor and walk away. I'll move on to the next question. We could go on and on about that. Do you have anything else to add about that? It's interesting. I guess being from another generation, I I think it's so hard for women in general to talk about all of this
Yeah.
because the people from the older generation are excited that women have age, like that they can go out and get what they want and that the apps make everything much more egalitarian than it used to be. And you decide, you swipe left, you swipe right, whatever.
Mm,
And yet that threat remains so prevalent in the world. I mean, for women,
yeah.
just
hmm
so it's a
That
hard
is,
place. It's a hard place to be in.
I guess, well, I guess two things to that. I think part of the sense of like divorced reality is a big part of the story. Like, I think it's kind of distressing to live the way that N is living, to
Yes.
feel that life, the physical world that you're in, is not really real. And then to also be existing online, but what kind of life is that? And she's very disassociated. So, I think there's a line in the story that I put in very deliberately, about she and her mom passing through the house, like A/B testing. Do you know
Yes.
A/B testing?
No, I was going to ask you that. So good. Good.
So it's like A/B testing, and it's kind of like a thing that they use in user experience design on the internet, where they will give, they'll make up like, let's say, two versions of a website, and then they'll randomly give one set of users the A set, like one design of the website, and then they'll give like the B set, like another version of the website, and they'll just randomly see like which version does better. So,
Okay.
so they're really A and B, like the user sets are really interacting with totally different online realities actually. And then that's how this girl N is experiencing, like, even her life with her mom, like they're kind of two passing ships in the night. They're not really like living in the same like circadian rhythm and stuff like that.
Right.
Like she feels so disconnected. And then later when she meets the king, I think I put in a line that was like, this is real, this is not real. And there's like a slash in the middle, as in like A/B testing, because she can't really differentiate. Like
Right.
she's having that struggle being like, is this a real experience or is this not a real experience? It's like a coin toss. She doesn't know.
Right. Oh
Yeah.
my God. That is amazing. You calling him the king there reminded me to ask you why why he would choose that name or why you chose that name for him.
The name Agamemnon the King, well, I knew I wanted the character to be like an actor in some way, to be involved in theater or have had a background in theater. And then
So is that so he could play this role basically? I mean, so he's already an actor, so he's now acting his part with her, or what was your thought there?
I don't know if it was a super conscious thought. I just had the sense that, well, I mean, he is interested, it seems, in movies. He has a lot of movies in his apartment. It seems like he had a background. I don't know. I was just kind of thinking of a character who was interested in like productions in some way.
Right.
And he is kind of a theatrical guy. Like in the first encounter, like doesn't he feeds her by hand or something, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Which
so
was
I kind
kind of
of
sexy. Yeah.
yeah, he thinks of things in those like production terms, I guess.
Right.
And but I think I really wanted him to think of himself as the king, like a king, because it's so masculine and like virile and like,
Right.
domineering. Yeah.
Right. I thought it was kind of cool though that his like, in the myth, like his wife kills him, which, which gave her a little agency in the story too, right? Like a little subtext. Can you tell me a little bit about the origin of the cave, which popped up on her sponsored ads? Because I wasn't familiar with that as
Yeah.
well.
It's not a real app.
Okay.
It
But what were you thinking? Like Play-Doh or?
like um I guess I wasn't thinking, maybe I was thinking of Plato very subconsciously.
That's
I think
cool though, how that happens.
yeah. Well yeah, it's I mean I think people using dating apps know that the different apps have different vibes. And some of them are more niche or maybe unsavory, if you could say, and than others. And in my head, the cave, it's an app that people use like 2D avatars again. It's very much like kind of internet centric. And, in my head, it was a bit of a sketchy app. I was actually thinking of this Chinese dating app my friend had shown me, which like she called it like Chinese Tinder. But I don't know, like everyone on it seemed kind of sketchy. Um,
Right.
and so I was thinking this is a similar app where people who use it are like a bit sketchy. Yeah.
So when you think about him, because I was trying to get a handle on the king, at first, I mean, you do a great job of like parceling out his sketchiness in small bites. Um, because at first, I thought, okay, just an older guy and he's into younger women. And then, there are the paintings on the wall, which are sketchy. And then some of the choices of movies. I'd love to hear how you came up with the choices and what you were thinking. And then he, goes on to say like, oh, they could all be played by children. I forget what he was referring to. Yeah, but
Mm.
yeah. So what was your thought with him when you thought about him as a character?
In a way, he's a composite of many like real sketchy older men that I have either like met or heard about through others. The the photographs. So there are these descriptions of like a Japanese photographer who he has like prints of around his
Yes.
apartment. That is based on a real photographer. I can't remember the name because basically I got this like advertisement when I was working at a magazine in Tokyo many years ago for this gallery exhibit of photographs that looked like that of, many like naked young women kind of arranged in stark poses around like brutalist architecture, and it was all like black and white. And I remember getting this like advertisement for the gallery release and think this is so unsavory. Like, and I was thinking to myself, like, who is this photographer? I would not want to be in front of the camera, in front of his camera. And so those photographs kind of stayed with me. And then years later, when I was writing the story, I put those in as a symbol of like, if you're the kind of guy who likes these photographs and thinks that they're like cool, that says something about you. And then, I think that in the beginning, Anne doesn't really know how much older he is than her. Like she's kind of in denial about it. And the movies that I chose, they're all like 80s movies, which kind of like is an early indication of his age. And then they're all like horror, like psycho, like thriller type movies. So that also kind of indicates his taste. Like they're very sensationalist. They're kind of violent, or macabre, which is the kind of guy he is.
Yeah. Okay. So then she decides. So let's talk about the chase, not the chase scene, but the scene where, so he starts texting her. He gets more and more needy. She uses the term needy. I was starting to think he was unhinged. And then he follows her. She was so smart. She didn't go home, obviously, and went to the other house. But I guess when you were drafting the story, were you what were you thinking? Like, how do I get her out of this situation? Were you wondering, or did you always know how you were going to get her out of that situation, or that wasn't the central situation in the story?
I guess, well, I did not always know how the chasing
Okay.
was going to go, the quote unquote chasing.
Right.
I needed her to have kind of an extreme situation where she's finally going to be like, hang on a second. Like, up until this point, there was some plausible deniability, maybe. But
Right.
that, like, I wanted there to be a situation extreme enough where she was finally like, hold on, this guy might be dangerous. And like, finally realize that. So that's what's happening in that scene where he's following her on the freeway. I mean, everything he says has a layer of plausible deniability to it. He's like, let me make sure the car's working okay, like, let me make sure you get home safe. But I do think that, and in my own life, and I'm sure many young women, like, they've had experiences where an older man will try to like insert some power through like fake care.
Right. And it's sort of like gaslighting because you don't know what's the reality here. I mean, not gaslighting might be the wrong term, but you're not sure what he's really after. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, it might also just be like pushing the envelope, like trying to be like, how far can I like exert power over this young woman?
Right.
In a way. I don't know if it's even conscious to the men themselves, like why they're doing it.
Right.
But I think, like I mostly wanted there to be a situation extreme enough for her to finally like zap back into physical reality and be like, whoa, like I'm in danger.
Right. There were scenes where just I thought you layered all of the scenery in the story sort of lent itself to her situation. For instance, like when she has no blinds in her, she's so exposed in her own condo. And that's not something that I think men think about a lot. I just know that from personal experience where I've been in a situation where I'm like, there are no blinds here. And the guy is like, well, there's, only a lake out there or whatever. Who's going to be looking at you? And you think, do you really think that way? You don't think like who could be looking in this window? That's a unique situation to people who, for whatever reason, have felt physically vulnerable before. But you do that throughout the story, like you get that sense everywhere she goes that not only is she disassociated, but there's a vulnerability there as well, in certain scenes in the car. And then there's the scene with her coworker, which I thought was fascinating too. He doesn't have a name for most of the story. And then in the very end, you give him a name. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. What was your thought there? He was very...
he was nice. Right?
Yeah, he was very nice. Almost unbelievably nice after everything else that had happened. So... So is that why he deserved a name?
Well,
he was sure.
No, not exactly. I mean, I think he's listed as the 22-year-old throughout most of the story. And I think part of it is, and the main character's own sense of self-consciousnness. Like she's so self-conscious that she's the oldest one working this weird job in the desert.
Right.
And she's not connecting to anyone else. Like she's very disconnected from any real relationships in the whole story. And I think, and so she sees the other two people as like these people who are younger than me. One of them's 22, one of them's like 19 or something. So that's how she thinks of them.
Right.
And I mean, I think also like her vulnerability is because she doesn't have those people in her ear. Like her mom's not around. Like, she doesn't seem to have friends. Like they're not telling her, like she's not telling anyone about the encounter she had with the king. So there's no one to be like, hang on, are you sure he's not sketchy? Like she's totally having a very isolated.
Right.
It is very vulnerable. No one knows that she's going to meet him or anything like that.
Yeah. And then she has that thought about her mom, where, actually my mom would be upset if this happened to me. So what is the story with she and her mom? Like, what were you thinking? I actually, being a mom, thought, okay, this is what happens because over a certain period of time, like, when people start gaming more or you're getting older and you don't want your parent to be around that much, or they feel like they're violating your privacy. I just have noticed that a lot of parents will like back off a little bit and just be like, okay, live your life. And then there's this whole new realm of the internet which was not around before, right? So you don't realize how much of another world your child is like going into. Do you know what I mean? Like to the mom,
Hmm.
she's just in the other room. But to N, she's in a whole other place. And so I don't I don't know. I'm just sort of projecting onto the mom that maybe she didn't realize how far away N is.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she does. I mean, I think that the mom is just the mom, and there's no other parent to like kind of help out with the situation in the story, and has come back home after being away for college and stuff. So I think, it's kind of difficult. It's difficult to parent in that situation, probably. Like your child is a full grown adult at this point and just
Well,
kind of like
you don't want to
sharing
alienate
space with
them.
you.
Yeah.
But also the mom is working. Like she's working a lot. She's a tired person. Like she has to like work all these late hours at the night shift and like, she just doesn't get to see Anne very often, which probably like is not the mom's fault, but makes and she probably just thinks like, my daughter's 25. She's like, she's old enough to like live life on her own. I don't think it's like actively like anything weird is going on. It's just the mom is busy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just it was so it was heartbreaking in a way because I just had the sense that the mom didn't know what was actually transpiring. And if she had known, um, she might have done something. Okay, I want to talk about the aviator. Um, and one of the people who was taking our class when we were doing the pass-throughs mentioned the aviator glasses and how many times there were sunglasses or the aviator glasses in the story, which of course are just mirror projections, right? But she describes the aviator. He wore aviator glasses and had a cigarette. She never saw his eyes, but she knew he was looking at her. He had short, bristly black hair, wore a crisp white shirt with an embroidered insignia and pressed dark pants. Even in the heat, he must have been someone at the school. He must have been a pilot. If she looked at him in the face, he didn't turn away. And one thing I didn't realize until I had read the story like 3 times was how many assumptions Anne is making about other people. Mainly, I was thinking because she doesn't come into direct contact with them. And it was, so this was one of them. She assumes the aviator's a man. And we were really talking about it. And I would love to hear your take on the aviator. Well, it also seemed like the aviator was a witness, right? And a witness to her life, so that there was always someone, like if she was living an alternate reality, like sort of like a game herself, the aviator was not playing, like not moving the levers or anything, but at least watching everything unfold. That was as far as we got in understanding the aviator.
That's an interesting interpretation, which I hadn't thought of. Well, the aviator, I mean, she feels threatened by him, in quotation marks.
Like he disapproves. Does she feel like he disapproves when he's watching her like that?
I'm not sure that I felt like she felt he disapproved because he had no idea what's going on in her life. But I think that there are many young women who feel like they're being watched by men and that it's freaky, like it's scary.
Yep. Very scary.
It adds to the sense of threat that's kind of prevalent throughout the story. Like, she listens to local news, there's stories of kidnappings. Like all around her are these like indications that it's scary and dangerous to be a young woman and that there are real physical threats, mostly perpetrated by men, and that people could disappear or be hurt or abducted or so on. So I think, the aviator character at first is there to add that tension. Like, is something going to happen with the aviator character? Like, is this girl actually surrounded by danger on all sides? And she does feel that she's surrounded by danger on all sides. Like, she feels the sense of threat everywhere, actually. But it seems to me anyway, she's a very like, she has all these assumptions, as you said, that are kind of like about other people's threats, like threateningness to her. But for some reason, she's not really able to like act on that sense of fear. Like she's not able to like quickly extricate herself from like the sketchy king, and she Like, even though she has a vague amorphous sense of threat, she doesn't also always listen to it. She's not really in control of like her own safety actually, and sometimes she can't even protect herself. So initially I had the aviator as a character to kind of indicate like, young women in the world, they really are under threat. And there are people like, this who like might like stare at a young woman for days and days and days and days. And then like, who knows what they're going to do. But then at the end, it's kind of like a reveal that the aviator is not a man, but a woman, a young woman. And I'm curious, first of all, what you thought of that.
I I wanted to, well, one thought I had was that the aviator was her. Like that she was watching, that there was, there's that theory that each of us has, like there's the part of us that's operating. I can't remember which philosopher this comes from, but then there's the witness, right? So these are two people within you. You are the agent in your own life, operating, going about things. And then there's a part of you that's sort of removed from what you're doing that's watching you. So part of me was like, okay, this is interesting. Like she's the avatar and the aviator is her watching what she's doing. And so it's like a real life game. But then I also thought that, I don't know. Then I thought, I don't know what I thought. Actually, after that, I kind of thought, okay, then it's just a legitimate other woman who's watching her and that she can find safety. There are women who are empowered and that she can find safety somehow through this other woman, but I wasn't sure. I don't know. So that doesn't make sense either. I'm trying to think of what other people thought. I think there was one woman who said that she has all these assumptions about people. And when her assumption is so wrong in the case of the aviator, she learns a big lesson in that she actually has to interact with people. She has to get closer. She has to see them, see who they actually are. And this was one instance in which, all of her, I don't want to call it paranoia, but she's she's rightfully paranoid as a young woman, right? But it's not always correct. You're not always under threat. So you have to learn to discern where the threats are. And I guess part of that is going out into the world and taking some more chances, maybe. But then there was the fact that she sees the aviator, she crashes into the wall. She's watching the aviator or the fence, right? With the 22-year-old in the car.
That's right.
So it was kind of dangerous. All right, so help me out. Oh God, are they all really off?
Well, I don't think there's, I think I put the aviator there and and the
It's a
reveal at
good,
the end is not something I had always like planned.
right,
But it kind of like came to me and I liked that it's surprising, that it subverts whatever reader like might be expecting the aviator to be doing, especially
right,
since the story has been building up like this thing about the danger of men and how like this girl is in danger, but she doesn't see it this whole time. I liked that I was ending it on a more ambiguous note. I think it's true she's paranoid and part of it's really, rightfully so. I think that, like I said, she also doesn't always know what to do with her sense of fear because she still puts herself into dangerous situations. But I also think, I think that in real life, you can't always know. Like you can work and work and work on like trying to be discerning and have good judgment your whole life. You can try to be smart, you can try to be practical, you know, but the world and humans are full of uncertainties. So you actually,
right,
there is no surefire way of knowing who is going to be safe and who is not going to be safe.
right,
And I mean, you could even, be with someone a long time and suddenly they become unsafe. Like all sorts of things happen.
right,
And I think so. I think I wanted to subvert the reader's expectations there and also play a little bit with gender expectations. Like, do we just assume that she's less safe, that she is safe because she's a woman? Or,
right.
I mean, she is nice. She asks if that is okay.
Yeah,
But like, what
right.
are our expectations now that we know that she's a different gender? Is something I
Well,
wanted to
that's,
make the reader question.
yeah. Well, I was wondering, I guess I was looking at that from another angle because I was like, oh, maybe, because she's very, attracted to her and maybe this like opened up a new attraction to women instead. But then I see that is so fascinating. Like, of course, the minute we hear, that's fascinating. I'm just processing it right now. The minute we hear it's a woman, I was like, okay, she's okay. But you're right. Even though it's a woman, she's been just like staring at her. Not really
Or
staring.
thinks that she's not staring at her.
Yeah,
she might not be staring at her.
Right. She has aviator glasses on,
Yeah.
so who knows? That's so fascinating, though. You're right. The minute I found out it was a woman, I was like, oh, she's okay now. She's not in danger. So was this an ending that came to you after you'd written the story? I imagine like it didn't come to you at first, or did you write the story straight through and then realize, oh, the aviator is a woman, or was that a little while coming?
Oh, it's been a while. I can't totally remember. I'm sure, I think it didn't take that long to get to the ending in my memory. Like in my memory, the ending came kind of naturally. I don't want to make things easy for Anne, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like I wish, I'm sure she wishes, and I wish that the real world was like this, that there's a roadmap to discern what's a safe circumstance, what's a safe person, and what's a situation that's going to turn out well for me and what's not. But she doesn't have that, and the world doesn't give us that. And so I really did want the end. The story in a way, the king is creepy, but we the reader, even if Anne doesn't know, the reader knows from the beginning that the king is creepy.
Yeah.
And so we sort of know that this is not going to end well for Anne. Or there's going to be a situation that Anne is going to have to get out of if she's going to remain safe, even though Anne doesn't know that. But then I wanted the ending to not have to land predictably. Like I wanted there to be a disruption where this narrative that she met a creepy man and something's going to happen, I wanted that to also be disrupted.
Yes. And it was amazing. I know oh my gosh, we're way out of time, but I want one last question. So she gets sick, her stomach is upset, and then it turns out it's her period as well. But there was some idea that it was more than a period. It felt like bigger than a period. So what was going on?
Yeah, I think in my mind, it's like the belated reaction to the intensity of that night that she had, the first night that she met the king. And she doesn't recognize that he's scary, but her body is screaming at her, being like, actually, he's really scary. Actually, this night was really weird. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of signals that she's ignoring in her body. And then, 24 hours later, she starts feeling all shivery and has this belated reaction to this really intense fear or whatever feeling she was having that she was suppressing and ignoring.
Right.
But then she also on her period. I wanted to give that plausible deniability to herself, where sometimes, your body might know something, or you might instinctively know something that you don't want to admit or that you're in denial about. And, there's all sorts of reasons why a body can be nauseous.
Yeah. So
I wanted to give her that doubt. And, I've been in situations where I have sort of known something was maybe, in retrospect, I was having a lot of anxiety or a psychosomatic reaction, and my body was behaving in weird ways. But at the time, I was just oh my gosh, I guess I better take an antacid or something, not thinking it's really related to an emotional cause. So I wanted to give her that self-doubt.
I love that, because it's so true. People say listen to your body, but it's so hard in the moment to know what's actually physiologically happening or psychologically happening, or a mixture of the two. Yeah, we should hone our instincts, I guess. Maybe. Although your instincts are based on what you know of the world, right?
Yes, so complicated.
It is really complicated. So what are you working on now?
Just some new fiction, some essays.
Okay, cool.
Little things here and there, yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody will be thrilled to hear this interview. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for your close reading. It's very honoring to be read.